A family marked by loss finds hope again in the arms of a new woman, young, elegant, and seemingly perfect. But something dark begins to grow in the children's eyes, and the silence of the house reveals a fear that cannot be explained. Disguised as a gardener, the father observes everything, recording every gesture, every word, every hidden cruelty. And when the truth explodes before everyone, no mask can withstand the power of a father who decides to fight for his children. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. The afternoon sun illuminated the gardens of Palm Grove Manor, high in the Kensington district of London. Roderick Matthews watched from the wide office window as he adjusted his Italian silk tie. At 45, his face bore the marks of someone who had known both success and pain. His business empire, Matthews Tech, had become one of the country's largest technology companies, but the price of success had been too high. Anne, his companion of 2 decades, had passed away just over a year ago, leaving him with 2 young children and an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. "Daddy, look what I drew." Sophie's voice, his 6-year-old daughter, interrupted his thoughts. The girl ran into the office, her curly hair bouncing as she held up a colorful paper. Roderick knelt down, leveling himself to his daughter's height. Sophie had her mother's same greenish-brown eyes, a constant reminder of Anne. "It's beautiful, Princess. Did you draw all of us?" he asked, observing the stick figures representing the family. "Yes, this is you, this is Peter, this is me, and this—" Sophie pointed to a female figure in a red dress that Roderick didn't immediately recognize. "That's Aunt Beatrice," she completed, looking at him with a mixture of expectation and hesitation. Roderick felt a tightening in his chest. Beatrice Caldwell had entered his life just 4 months ago. They met at a charity event, and since then she had become a constant presence in his life and, apparently, in Sophie's imagination. "It's lovely, honey. Shall we hang it on the fridge?" he suggested, trying to mask his surprise at seeing his daughter already including Beatrice in family drawings. That night, as he adjusted his bow tie in front of the mirror, Roderick thought about the changes that were coming. Tonight's dinner would be special. After months of a discreet relationship, he had asked Beatrice to marry him. She was everything he could wish for: intelligent, sophisticated, a business graduate with a master's degree from France, and she seemed genuinely affectionate with his children. Sophie and Peter, just 3 years old, needed a maternal figure, and Beatrice seemed perfect for that role. "You look very elegant, sir," commented Mrs. Teresa, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 15 years. Her eyes, however, carried a shadow of concern that Roderick preferred to ignore. "Thank you, Teresa. Are the children ready?" "Yes, sir. Sophie is in her room reading a book, and little Peter is with Julia finishing getting dressed." Julia was the nanny, a young woman in her early 20s who had cared for the children since Anne had passed away. The children adored her, but Beatrice had subtly suggested that after the wedding, it might be better to professionalize the household staff. The doorbell rang precisely at 8 o'clock. Beatrice was punctual as a Swiss watch. Roderick opened the door and felt his heart quicken at the sight of her. Dressed in an elegant navy blue dress that highlighted her fair skin and perfectly styled blonde hair, she looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. "You're stunning," he said, kissing her softly. "And you're very charming," she replied with a calculated smile, handing him a bottle of French champagne. To celebrate. The dining room was set for a special evening. Lit candles, the finest china, crystals that reflected the golden light. Roderick had asked the private chef to prepare Beatrice's favorite menu, burrata with the confit tomatoes, followed by grilled salmon with asparagus, and to finish a chocolate soufflé. Sophie and Peter came down for dinner, both dressed like small adults. Beatrice had insisted on choosing their clothes, and Roderick had conceded, finding her interest in the details adorable. "Good evening, Aunt Beatrice," Sophie greeted, politely formal. "Good evening, dear. What a beautiful dress you're wearing." "It matches your eyes perfectly," Beatrice replied, adjusting a lock of the girl's hair with a gesture that seemed affectionate, but made Sophie imperceptibly stiffen. Peter ran to Beatrice, who picked him up with a wide smile. "And there's my little prince. How handsome you look today." During dinner, Roderick watched with satisfaction as Beatrice interacted with the children, always patient, always attentive. She cut Peter's meat into small pieces, praised Sophie's vocabulary, and told stories about Paris that kept everyone entertained. It was at dessert that Roderick made the announcement. "Children, I have very special news to share with you," he began, holding Beatrice's hand across the table. "Beatrice and I have decided to get married. She will live here with us and become part of our family." There was a moment of complete silence. Sophie's face paled slightly while Peter looked confused from one adult to another. "Does that mean Aunt Beatrice will be our mum?" Sophie finally asked, in a small voice that didn't match her normally vibrant personality. "It means I will take care of you with all the love in the world, darling," Beatrice replied before Roderick could speak. "We will be a very happy family, you'll see." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, an intimate ceremony in the manor's garden, with only close family and a few friends. Sophie was the flower girl, serious and composed in her peach-colored dress. Peter carried the rings on a small cushion, guided by Julia, who smiled encouragingly at the little boy. In the weeks that followed, the manor underwent subtle transformations. Beatrice redecorated some rooms, replaced paintings, and moved furniture. Photos of Anne were discreetly removed from common areas and transferred to an album that was stored in the library. Roderick observed the changes with a mixture of gratitude and nostalgia. On one hand, the house seemed to gain a new life. On the other, he felt as if parts of his history were being erased. But these were necessary sacrifices, he thought, to build a new beginning. A month after the wedding, Roderick had to travel for business to Edinburgh. It was the first time he had left the children alone with Beatrice. "Are you sure everything will be fine?" he asked as he packed his suitcase. "Of course, darling," Beatrice replied with her perfect smile. "The children and I will use this time to get even closer. Don't worry about a thing." On the morning of his departure, Roderick said goodbye to the children with tight hugs. Sophie hugged him with unusual strength, as if she didn't want to let him go. Peter cried, something he rarely did when his father travelled. "I'll be back in 3 days, I promise," Roderick said, intrigued by his children's reaction. "You'll have a lot of fun with Beatrice, I'm sure." As the chauffeur drove towards the airport, Roderick looked through the rear window and saw Sophie and Peter waving from the doorway, flanked by Beatrice, who smiled and waved elegantly. The image seemed perfect, like a happy family postcard. But there was something in Sophie's gaze that disturbed him throughout the flight, a shadow, a silent plea he couldn't decipher. When he returned 3 days later, the children greeted him with enthusiasm, but Roderick noticed something different. Sophie was quieter, more restrained. Peter clung to his leg as if fearing he would disappear again. Beatrice, on the other hand, was radiant. "It was wonderful, darling. The children behaved very well, didn't they, children?" she said, with a tone that brooked no contradiction. Sophie nodded silently. Peter buried his face in his father's leg. "Sophie is learning table manners, isn't she, dear? And Peter is almost managing to sleep alone in his bed without that old teddy bear." Roderick frowned. The old teddy bear was Toby, the stuffed bear Anne had given Peter when he was born. The boy never slept without him. "I thought Peter liked sleeping with Toby," Roderick commented, running his hand through his son's hair. "Children need to grow up, darling," Beatrice replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We can't feed childish attachments forever, can we?" That night, as Roderick put Peter to bed, the boy whispered, "Daddy, Toby is gone." "What do you mean, son? Did you look properly?" "Aunt Bee said he went on a trip," the boy replied, his eyes watering, "but I didn't want him to." "Travel, Daddy." It was the first sign that something was not right in the new family Roderick had tried to build. A sign too small to alarm, too big to completely ignore. A sign that, unbeknownst to him, was just the beginning. In the following weeks, the routine at Palm Grove Manor settled under Beatrice's impeccable coordination. Meals were served punctually, the children had strict schedules for study, play, and rest, and the house ran with Swiss watch precision. For Roderick, this organization seemed to be the answer to the chaos that had set in after Anne's passing. However, like A tide slowly eroding the coast, small changes began to occur in the manor. Mrs. Teresa, the long-serving housekeeper, was the first to leave, citing health problems that required her attention back in Yorkshire. Roderick regretted the departure of the woman who had been almost like a grandmother to his children, but Beatrice quickly hired a replacement, Marcia, a silent and efficient woman whose sole aim seemed to be to please the new lady of the house. "Daddy, why did Aunt Teresa leave without saying goodbye to us?" Sophie asked one night, as Roderick tucked her into bed. "She had to leave quickly, Princess. Her sister was ill," he replied, repeating the explanation Beatrice had given him. "But she always said we were like grandchildren to her. She promised she would never leave without saying goodbye," Sophie insisted, her big eyes fixed on her father's. The question lingered in Roderick's mind in the days that followed. It was true that Teresa's departure had been strangely abrupt. He even tried to call her, but the number he had wouldn't connect. Julia, the children's beloved nanny, was the next to leave. Beatrice informed Roderick that the young woman had received a better offer from another family and decided to accept it without prior notice. "She didn't even say goodbye to the children?" Roderick questioned, surprised. "It was very impolite of her, I agree," Beatrice replied, adjusting a flower arrangement in the living room. "But I've already hired an excellent replacement. Edwina is a pedagogy graduate with impeccable references." Edwina was a middle-aged woman with thick-rimmed glasses and a severe expression. She spoke little, smiled even less, and seemed to regard any display of affection as a sign of weakness. Peter, who used to run joyfully into Julia's arms, now hid behind his father's legs when Edwina entered the room. One morning, Roderick woke up earlier than usual and decided to prepare breakfast for the children, something he used to do before the wedding. Upon entering the kitchen, he found Sophie sitting alone at the table, eating a bowl of cereal without milk. "Good morning, Princess. Where's the milk for your cereal?" he asked, kissing the top of his daughter's head. Sophie quickly glanced at the door before replying in a low voice. "Aunt B said I don't deserve milk today because I took too long to tidy my room." Roderick frowned. "That doesn't make sense, Sophie. Let's put milk in that cereal right now." As he opened the fridge, he heard the sound of heels in the hallway. Beatrice appeared at the kitchen door, impeccably dressed in a navy blue ensemble, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Darling, you're up early," she commented with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was just coming to prepare a special breakfast for you." "I was just putting milk in Sophie's cereal," he replied, noticing how his daughter suddenly became interested in the bottom of her bowl. "Oh, Sophie is in time out this morning," Beatrice said in a sweet but firm voice. "She didn't tidy her room as we agreed and needs to learn that actions have consequences." "I don't think depriving a child of milk in their cereal is an appropriate punishment, Beatrice," Roderick replied, pouring milk into Sophie's bowl. A flicker of something cold passed through Beatrice's eyes, so quickly that Roderick almost believed he had imagined it. "Of course you're the father," she said with a slightly tense tone. "But we talked about consistency in education, remember? Children need clear boundaries." Before he could reply, Peter ran into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, his little face lighting up at the sight of his father. "Daddy!" the boy cried, running into his arms. Roderick lifted him into the air, laughing at his son's joy. "Peter, you know you shouldn't run through the house," Beatrice admonished, her abrupt tone contrasting with the joyful atmosphere. "And you're still in your pajamas outside permitted hours." The boy's smile vanished instantly. Roderick felt the small body stiffen in his arms. "He's only 3, Beatrice," Roderick said, trying to keep his tone light, "and he's excited to see me." "It's precisely at this age that habits are formed," she replied, approaching to take Peter from his father's arms. "Let's change those clothes right now, young man." Something in the way Peter clung to him made Roderick hesitate. "Let me take him to change. It's been a while since I spent a morning with the children." A look of annoyance quickly crossed Beatrice's face, but she recomposed herself with a polite smile. "As you wish, darling. I'll take the opportunity to review some emails then." That morning with the children was revealing. Sophie, normally talkative and curious, seemed to measure every word. Peter practically didn't stray from his father, as if fearing he would disappear. When Roderick asked if they liked the new nanny, Sophie merely shrugged, while Peter looked at the door, as if checking if anyone was listening. "You can tell me anything. You know that, don't you?" Roderick said, feeling a growing unease in his chest. Sophie bit her lower lip, a habit she had when she was nervous. "Aunt B said that children who complain are spoiled children," she finally said, almost in a whisper. That afternoon, Roderick received an unexpected call at the office. It was Mary, an old friend of Anne's who had been Sophie's godmother. "Roderick, I know it's none of my business, but are the children all right?" she asked after the initial greetings. "Of course, why?" "Well, I tried to visit Sophie last week, but your wife said she was sick and couldn't receive visitors. I tried again yesterday and was told you were traveling, but I saw Sophie at school today when I went to pick up my nephew, and she seemed different. She barely spoke to me." Roderick felt a chill in his stomach. He had no knowledge of any visit from Mary, much less of Sophie being sick or any trip. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll check into it and call you back." That night, during dinner, Roderick observed his family with new eyes. Beatrice spoke animatedly about a charity event she was organizing, while the children ate in silence, eyes fixed on their plates. "Sophie, Mary called me today. She said she tried to visit you a few times," he commented casually. Sophie looked up quickly, appearing frightened before glancing at Beatrice. "Oh yes," Beatrice interjected softly. "I explained to Mary that we're in a family adjustment phase and that it would be best to limit visits for now. The children were getting too many privileges and we needed to establish a healthy routine." "I don't recall us discussing that," Roderick replied, keeping his tone neutral, despite the tension he was beginning to feel. "You've been so busy, darling. I didn't want to bother you with household details." Beatrice smiled, placing her hand over his. "I'm just doing what's best for our family." Later, after putting the children to bed, Roderick went to his office and opened his laptop. Something was bothering him, a growing feeling that there were missing pieces in the puzzle of his new family life. He opened the house's security camera app, something he rarely did since marrying Beatrice. He played the recordings from the previous week and saw Mary at the front door, being greeted by Beatrice. The conversation seemed tense and Beatrice clearly prevented her from entering, despite the visitors' protests. Sophie appeared for a moment in the background of the hall, but Beatrice quickly closed the door without letting the girl approach. He fast-forwarded to other recordings, and what he saw chilled him. Beatrice, always impeccable and smiling in his presence, transformed when she was alone with the children. There was no physical aggression, but her face hardened, her voice became sharp. In one scene, she held Sophie's arm with excessive force while whispering something in the girl's ear that made her pale. He was so absorbed in the disturbing images that he didn't hear the office door open. "What are you doing, darling?" Roderick started at Beatrice's voice. She stood in the doorway, wearing a blue silk nightgown, her face a mask of amiable concern. "Just checking some emails," he replied, quickly closing the laptop. "We lost an important contract today, and I'm trying to understand what happened." "I'm sorry," she said, approaching to massage his shoulders. "You work too much. Why don't you come to bed? I can help relieve that tension." Roderick forced a smile, but his mind was racing. The contrast between the woman massaging his shoulders and the one he saw in the recordings was disturbing. "I'll be there in a minute," he replied. "I just need to finish reading a report." When Beatrice left, Roderick remained motionless for several minutes. The man who had built an empire from scratch, who had overcome immeasurable obstacles in his professional life, felt completely lost. He loved Beatrice, or at least the version of her he knew, but he loved his children above all else. He needed to discover the complete truth, and for that, he would need a plan that not even the controlling Beatrice could anticipate. The morning was fresh in London when Roderick parked his Porsche Cayenne in front of the small apartment in Islington, in the north of the city. The middle-class neighborhood contrasted sharply with the luxury of Kensington where he lived. He took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell of apartment 302. The door was opened by a middle-aged man with graying hair and a curious expression. "Charles, thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Roderick said, shaking the hand of the man who had been his head of security for over a decade before retiring the previous year. "For you, I'm always available," Charles replied, leading him into the simple but well-organized apartment. "From your tone on the phone, I imagined it was serious." Sitting in the small living room with strong coffee served in mismatched cups, Roderick explained his situation. Charles listened, attentively without interrupting, his face hardening as the story progressed. "I need to know exactly what happens in my house when I'm not there," Roderick concluded, his eyes fixed on the cup he held. "And I'll need your help." Charles scratched his chin, thoughtful. "Aren't the house cameras enough? If she's already realized you check them, she'll probably avoid doing anything compromising where there's a recording." "Exactly. And I'm sure she's already identified the blind spots. Besides, the cameras don't capture audio clearly, and I suspect much of what happens is more verbal than physical." "Then we need someone inside the house, someone she won't suspect," Charles concluded. "But who? She's already dismissed your trusted staff." Roderick finally looked up, determination shining in his eyes. "Myself? What do you mean?" "I'll disguise myself and enter my own house as a staff member. No one knows me better than you, Charles. If I can disguise myself enough to fool you, I'll certainly fool Beatrice." Charles frowned, evaluating the proposal. "It's risky. If she finds out, I'll have my answers anyway," Roderick interrupted. "I can't continue living with this doubt, especially when it comes to my children's well-being." In the following hours, the two men meticulously planned. Roderick would announce a business trip to the Scottish Highlands, where his company was expanding. In reality, he would remain in London, staying in a discreet hotel under a false name. "The gardener who takes care of the manor's garden is about to retire," Roderick explained. "Beatrice has already mentioned that we need to hire someone. Could you recommend a nephew who is looking for a job?" 3 days later, the plan was put into action. Roderick said goodbye to his family with tight hugs for the children and a formal kiss for Beatrice. "It will only be 2 weeks, darling," he said, adjusting his tie. "I'm sure you'll be fine." "Of course," Beatrice replied with her perfect smile. "We'll use this time to establish some new routines with the children. When you return, you'll be surprised by their progress." There was something in her tone that made Roderick inwardly shiver, but he kept a fixed smile on his face. "I can't wait to see." The next day at 7 a.m., Charles parked his rusty pickup truck in front of the manor. In the passenger seat, Roderick was practically unrecognizable. Full fake beard covered half his face. Temporary dye had darkened his normally light brown hair, thick-rimmed glasses altered the shape of his face, and discreet makeup created the illusion of wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. He wore simple, worn clothes, very different from the Italian suits he usually wore. "Remember, your name is Raymond Smith. You're my nephew, came from rural Yorkshire looking for work. Speak little, keep your head down, and never look directly into her eyes for too long," Charles instructed. "Understood," Roderick replied, his voice deliberately hoarser and with a slight Yorkshire accent he had practiced. Charles rang the intercom and informed them he had come at Mr. Roderick's request to present a candidate for the gardener position. After a few minutes, they were led to the back of the manor, where Marcia, the new housekeeper, awaited them. "Mrs. Beatrice is still resting, but she instructed me to interview the candidate," the woman informed with a serious expression. "And you are?" "Raymond Smith, ma'am," Roderick replied, keeping his eyes downcast and his posture slightly stooped. "I've had experience with gardening since I was a boy. I worked on the farms back in Yorkshire." Marcia assessed him with a critical eye. "The garden is extensive, and Mrs. Beatrice is very demanding. We have rare roses, imported orchids, and an irrigation system that needs to be monitored daily." "I can handle it," Roderick affirmed humbly. "My uncle taught me everything about plants." Charles intervened, explaining that he had worked for Mr. Roderick for many years and could vouch for his nephew's character. Marcia seemed to weigh the information. "I will consult Mrs. Beatrice. Wait here." When the housekeeper walked away, Roderick let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "She didn't recognize me," he whispered. "Don't get too excited yet. The real test will be Beatrice." 15 minutes later, Beatrice herself appeared. She wore a designer tracksuit, her hair pulled back in an impeccable ponytail, as if she were ready for a photo shoot and not to interview a gardener. "Good morning, Charles," she greeted formally. "Roderick always spoke highly of you." "Mrs. Beatrice," Charles replied respectfully. "This is my nephew Raymond. He's hard-working and honest, I guarantee it." Beatrice's eyes, cold and calculating, examined Roderick from head to toe. He maintained his humble posture, avoiding direct eye contact. "Do you understand roses?" she asked, abruptly. "Yes, ma'am," Roderick replied, adopting a more pronounced accent. "My mother cultivated roses back in Yorkshire. I know how to treat rust, aphids, and how to prune for more flowers." "And are you willing to work every day, including some weekends when necessary?" "Yes, ma'am. I really need this job." Beatrice seemed satisfied with the answer. "Marcia will show you the garden and explain your responsibilities. The salary is reasonable, but I demand perfection. One mistake and you're out. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for the opportunity." Charles said goodbye, giving Roderick a last encouraging look. Was official. He was infiltrated in his own home. The first 2 days were for reconnaissance. Roderick worked diligently in the garden, familiarizing himself with his new routine and discreetly observing the movements of the house. He slept in a small room at the back of the property, reserved for staff, and ate in the servants' kitchen. It was on the 3rd day that he had his first glimpse of the truth. He was pruning bushes near the living room window when he heard Beatrice's voice, unusually loud and sharp. "Sophie, what did I say about leaving toys scattered around?" Approaching discreetly, he saw through the partially open window his daughter standing in the middle of the room, head bowed, while Beatrice held a doll with a look of disgust. "Sorry, Aunt Bea," Sophie murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "Aunt Bea," Beatrice repeated, her tone dangerously soft. "How many times do I have to repeat what you should call me?" Sophie swallowed hard. "Sorry, Mommy." "Better. Now, as punishment for this disorganization, no dessert today and tomorrow. And I want you to write, 'I must keep my toys organized' 50 times. "But I have math homework to do," Sophie began. The sound of a slap on the table made the girl flinch. "Are you questioning me?" Beatrice's voice was pure ice. "Perhaps you need a more severe punishment to learn respect." "No, Mommy. I'll do as you said." "Good. And remember, if you tell your father anything when he comes back, I'll know I can't trust you. And people who don't deserve trust don't deserve love. Do you want your father to stop loving you?" Sophie's eyes widened in panic. "No." "Then be a good girl and keep our little secrets. Now go to your room and start writing." Roderick felt his blood boil in his veins. His initial impulse was to burst into the room, reveal himself and confront Beatrice right there. But that would compromise the entire plan. He needed more evidence. He needed to fully understand the extent of what was happening when he wasn't around. At lunchtime, Roderick, as Raymond, ate quickly in the staff kitchen. Peter was in his high chair, watching with sad eyes as Edwina, the severe nanny, fed him with mechanical movements. "Eat everything, boy, we don't have all day," she said dryly. Peter tried, but it was obvious he was having difficulty swallowing the food. His little eyes welled up when a piece of meat fell from his fork. "Look at the mess you made," Edwina reprimanded. "Mrs. Beatrice will hear about this lack of manners." Peter visibly paled, and Roderick felt a knot form in his throat. His 3-year-old son seemed terrified at the mere mention of Beatrice's name. "Small children sometimes drop food. It's normal," Roderick Raymond commented timidly, surprising himself with his own boldness. Edwina gave him a scathing look. "Gardeners take care of the garden. They don't offer opinions on children's education. Want to keep your job? Stay. Quiet." That afternoon, while working near the pool, Roderick saw a young woman he didn't know leave through the back door. She wore a simple domestic helper's uniform and carried a small backpack. She looked to be in her early 20s and had a kind, though tired, face. "Hello," she greeted him upon seeing him. "You must be the new gardener. I'm Yara. I've been working here for 2 weeks. "Raymond," he replied, standing up to shake her hand. "Nice to meet you." Are you enjoying the job so far? It's a beautiful garden, he replied cautiously. And you? Do you like working here? Something passed through Yara's eyes, hesitation, perhaps concern. The pay is good, she finally said, which wasn't really an answer. The children seem quiet, Roderick commented, trying to sound casual. Yara quickly looked back, as if checking if anyone could hear them. They're good children, she said, lowering her voice. They just need a little more human warmth, you know? Before she could say more, Marcia's voice sounded from inside the house calling for Yara. The young woman quickened her pace, giving Roderick a last meaningful look. That brief conversation intrigued Roderick. There was something in Yara's tone, a genuine concern that contrasted with Edwina's and Marcia's coldness. Could she be an ally? As evening fell, while putting away tools in the shed at the back, Roderick glimpsed Sophie at her bedroom window, bent over a desk, continuously writing what he presumed to be the punishment imposed by Beatrice. The girl's face showed exhaustion, and even from a distance, he could see she had been crying. That night, lying in the simple bed in the back room, Roderick made a decision. It wasn't enough to just observe, he needed to document. The next morning he would buy a small recorder. It was time to collect concrete evidence of what was really happening in his absence. Roderick's first week as Raymond was coming to an end when he realized he needed to intensify his plan. On his Sunday off, he discreetly left the property and met Charles at a modest cafe on Oxford Street. "I need recording equipment," he explained, after reporting his initial discoveries. "Something small, discreet, but with good audio quality." Charles nodded gravely. "I have some contacts. I can get button-sized microphones and recorders that fit in your pocket. But Roderick, I have to ask, have you considered simply confronting her with what you've found so far?" Roderick ran his hand through his now darkened hair, a habitual gesture he tried to avoid when disguised. "It's not that simple. If I confront her without concrete proof, she'll deny everything. She might even claim I'm disturbed, paranoid. And if there's a contested divorce—" He didn't complete the sentence, but the fear was implicit. In a legal battle, without evidence, he could lose custody of his children. On Monday, Roderick returned to the manor with a small recorder in his pocket and a discreet microphone, clipped to his shirt collar. The first person he saw was Yara, sweeping the back terrace with methodical movements. "Good morning," he greeted, forcing himself to maintain the Yorkshire accent he had adopted. "Good weekend?" Yara smiled slightly, seeming to appreciate the kindness. "Quiet. I visited my mother in Croydon, and you?" "I went to see my uncle," he replied, beginning to mow the lawn near the terrace. "He asked me how I'm settling in here." Something in the way Yara quickly glanced at the house before answering alerted Roderick. "It's a good job," she said, repeating the evasive answer from days before. Roderick worked in silence for a few minutes, thinking about how to approach the subject that truly interested him. It was Yara who broke the silence. "The children like you," she commented almost casually. This surprised him. "I've barely had contact with them. The little one, Peter, saw you working in the garden and said you looked like his father." She smiled briefly. "I think it's the glasses. Mr. Roderick wears them too." Roderick's heart tightened at hearing this. Had his son recognized him somehow, or was it just the innocent observation of a child? "They talk a lot about their father," Yara continued, lowering her voice, "especially at night when Mrs. Beatrice isn't around. They seem sad," Roderick ventured, keeping his eyes fixed on the grass he was cutting. Yara hesitated for a long moment before replying, "It's not my place to say anything. I need this job." "I understand," he replied, respecting her reluctance. "I need mine too." They worked in silence for a while longer, until they were interrupted by a child's voice. "Garden man." Peter ran towards them, momentarily escaping Edwina's vigilance. He wore blue overalls that Roderick didn't recognize, probably another of Beatrice's purchases to replace the clothes Anne had chosen. "Hi, little guy," Roderick replied, kneeling down to the boy's height, fighting the urge to hug him. "You have big scissors," Peter observed, pointing to the tool in Roderick's hand. "It's to cut the grass and make the garden beautiful." Peter's eyes sparkled. Can I help? I know how to help." Before Roderick could reply, Edwina appeared at the door, her face contorted in disapproval. "Peter, get back inside right now. You know you shouldn't talk to the staff without permission." The boy's smile vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of fear that broke Roderick's heart. "We were just talking," Yara explained softly. "He wasn't bothering anyone." "I wasn't asking you," Edwina retorted acidly. "Peter, now, or I'll have to tell your mother about this disobedience." Peter ran back to the house, casting a last look at the garden before entering. Edwina followed him, not without first giving a warning glare to Yara and Roderick. "See what I mean?" Yara whispered when they were alone again. "It's like this all the time. The children live in fear." "Has she always been like this?" Roderick asked, anger rising within him. "Since I started, yes. But according to Marcia, it got worse after Mr. Roderick travelled. Mrs. Beatrice says she's re-educating the children while he's away." Yara hesitated again before adding, "Last night, I heard little Sophie crying in her room. When I went in to see if she was all right, she was shivering from the cold. Mrs. Beatrice had taken away her blankets as punishment for not finishing all her dinner." The recorder in Roderick's pocket captured every word, but he almost wished it wasn't working. Each revelation was like a knife in his chest. "What did you do?" he asked, fearing the answer. Yara's face softened. "I waited until the house was quiet and brought her an extra blanket. I told her it would be our secret." She sighed. "If Mrs. Beatrice finds out, I'll probably be fired. But I couldn't let the girl freeze all night." At that moment, Roderick knew he had found an ally, even if she had no idea who he really was. In the following days, Roderick kept the recorder with him at all times, discreetly documenting the interactions in the house. He discovered that Beatrice reserved her worst behavior for when she was alone, with the children, presenting a completely different face when other adults were present, even the staff. She was a consummate actress. On a particularly hot afternoon, while working in the garden near the living room, he heard Beatrice's voice rise in fury. He cautiously approached the half-open window. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," she demanded. Sophie stood before her, her eyes reluctantly raised. The girl held an open notebook. "What is this drawing about?" Beatrice asked, pointing to something in the notebook. "It's our family," Sophie replied in a low voice. "And why did you draw this woman here?" Roderick couldn't see the drawing, but he could imagine what it was. Sophie had probably included Anne in the illustration. "It's Mommy," Sophie replied, almost inaudibly. The sound of paper tearing echoed through the room. "Your mother is me now," Beatrice declared, her voice overflowing with rage. "That woman is gone and isn't coming back. The faster you accept that, the better for all of us." "But Daddy said we can remember her, that she'll always be—" "Your father is weak and sentimental," Beatrice interrupted. "He allowed you to become spoiled and disobedient children. I am correcting his mistakes." Sophie began to cry silently, tears streaming down her little face without a sound. "Stop that crying right now," Beatrice ordered. "Tears are for babies, and you're already 6. I want you to go to your room and draw our real family. You, your brother, your father, and me. No ghosts, understood?" Sophie nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hands. "And don't you dare tell your father about this conversation when he comes back. You know what happens to children who tell lies, don't you?" Sophie nodded again, fear evident on her face. "Say it," Beatrice insisted. They end up alone," Sophie whispered. "No one believes them." "Exactly. Now go." When Sophie left, Beatrice picked up the remnants of the torn drawing and threw them into the fireplace, lighting a match to burn them completely. The symbolism of the gesture did not escape Roderick, who stepped away from the window with a heavy heart, and the recorder capturing every word exchanged. That night, Roderick was in the back room, reviewing the day's recordings, when he heard a soft knock at the door. He quickly hid the recorder under his pillow before opening it. Yara stood there holding a tray with a covered dish. "I noticed you didn't come for dinner," she explained. "I brought something from the kitchen." "Thank you," he said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Would you like to come in for a bit?" She hesitated, looking back as if checking if anyone was watching her, before quickly stepping inside. The room was small, with only a bed, a small table and a wardrobe, but it was impeccably tidy. habits Roderick couldn't abandon even in his disguise. "Rice, beans, and a little chicken," she said, placing the tray on the table. "It's not much, but it's what was left from the kitchen dinner." "It's more than enough," he thanked her, sitting down to eat. "Very kind of you to worry." Yara shrugged, a small smile on her face. "Everyone deserves a little kindness, don't they?" There was a moment of comfortable silence before she spoke again. Today was a difficult day for the children. Little Sophie was inconsolable after the lady tore up a drawing she made. Roderick swallowed with difficulty, trying to hide his reaction. Why would she do that? Apparently, Sophie drew her biological mother in the family portrait. Mrs. Beatrice doesn't tolerate any mention of the late Mrs. Matthews. Yara sighed. It's cruel. The children are too young to understand why they can't talk about their own mother anymore. "What did you do?" Roderick asked, watching her intently. Yara's face softened. "I took paper and colored pencils to her room when the lady wasn't looking. I told her she could make as many drawings as she wanted and keep them in a special folder under her mattress. Our secret." For the second time that day, Roderick had to fight back emotion. This young woman who barely knew his family was risking her job to bring some comfort to his children. "You're a special person, Yara," he said sincerely, momentarily forgetting his role as Raymond. "The children are lucky to have you." She blushed slightly. "I do what I can. My mother always says that small acts of kindness are like seeds. You never know what kind of tree they'll become." "Your mother is wise," Roderick commented, thinking of his own mother, who had taught him similar values. "She raised 3 children alone, working as a cleaner," Yara recounted, a touch of pride in her voice. "We never had much, but we never lacked love." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, Yara sharing fragments of her simple but dignified life, and Roderick increasingly impressed by her strength of character and natural kindness. "I better go before someone notices my absence," she finally said, standing up. "The lady doesn't like staff socializing after hours." "Thank you for the food and the company," Roderick replied, standing up as well. At the door, Yara hesitated. "Raymond, the children like it when you work near their windows. I think they feel less alone." After she left, Roderick stood still, for a long time, digesting everything he had discovered that day. His suspicions were being painfully confirmed. Beatrice was systematically erasing Anne's memory and emotionally isolating his children, using fear and manipulation as tools of control. He picked up the recorder and listened again to the conversations captured during the day. Every word, every veiled threat, every moment of psychological cruelty was like a dagger in his heart. How could he have been so blind? How did he not perceive the true nature of the woman he had married? The answer was simple and painful, because Beatrice never showed that side when he was present. Because he, desperate to fill the void left by Anne and provide a complete family for his children, had only seen what he wanted to see. That night, lying on the narrow bed, Roderick made a decision. He would not stay the full 2 weeks as initially planned. He already had enough evidence to confront Beatrice. But first, he needed one last recording, something so undeniable that not even the skilled Beatrice could distort or explain. And he suspected that the perfect opportunity would arise soon, during the elegant lunch Beatrice had mentioned to the staff, when she would receive her friends to show how perfect her new family was. Palm Grove Manor buzzed with activity from the early hours of the morning. Beatrice had summoned an additional service team to ensure everything was absolutely impeccable for the lunch she was hosting for her friends from London's social circle. Marcia coordinated the preparations with military efficiency, distributing orders and checking every detail under the watchful eye of her mistress. Roderick, in his role as Raymond, received specific instructions to ensure the garden was dazzling. "The guests will take a tour of the gardens before lunch," Marcia explained dryly. "Mrs. Beatrice wants every rose to be perfect and not a single leaf out of place." Since dawn, he had worked hard, trimming bushes, removing fallen leaves, and strategically watering so that everything shone under the London sun. As he worked near the kitchen window, he heard fragments of conversation among the staff. "I've never seen such a fuss over a simple lunch," commented the chef, hired especially for the occasion. Mrs. Beatrice wants to impress, Marcia replied. These women are important in her social circle. Many doubted when she married Mr. Roderick, thinking she wouldn't be able to manage a house of this size or care for his children. And the children? Asked the chef. Do they participate too? Of course. They are the centerpiece of the presentation. The lady spent the whole morning rehearsing with them how they should behave. That information made Roderick grip the handle of the gardening shears with unnecessary force. Rehearsing? As if his children were actors in a play orchestrated by Beatrice. Around 10 in the morning, he saw Yara crossing the garden hurriedly, carrying last-minute shopping bags. As she passed him, she slowed down for an instant. The children are a nervous wreck, she whispered. The lady woke them up at 6 to practice how to sit, how to speak, how to smile. Little Peter has already cried twice. Before he could reply, Marcia appeared at the back door, calling for Yara. The young woman quickened her pace, giving Roderick a last meaningful look. At noon, the first luxury cars began to arrive. Mercedes, BMWs and Porsches parked in the circular driveway of the manor. Elegantly dressed and impeccably groomed women emerged, each carrying a small gift for the hostess. Roderick observed them discreetly while pretending to work in a flower bed near the entrance. Beatrice greeted them with effusive hugs and exclamations of joy that sounded completely artificial to Roderick's ears. She wore an elegant champagne-colored silk dress, discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, and a smile as bright as it was false. Darlings, welcome to our humble home. I'm so happy you could come and see our little retreat. Humble. Little retreat. The 1,200-square-meter manor in Kensington was one of London's most luxurious properties. Beatrice's false modesty was just another facet of her elaborate performance. After the initial greetings, Beatrice led the guests on a tour of the gardens, exactly as Marcia had predicted. Roderick remained busy in a more secluded area, but strategically positioned to overhear the conversation. The garden is simply divine, Beatrice, praised one of the women, a middle-aged blonde in an impeccable Chanel suit. Thank you, Veronica. I completely redid the landscaping when I moved in. Roderick's late wife had peculiar tastes. The tone when mentioning Anne was slightly derogatory, something that made Roderick's blood boil. And the children? How are they adapting? Asked another guest, a tall brunette with an air of being more interested in gossip than in child welfare. Beatrice's smile acquired a touch of calculated pride. Surprisingly well. Of course, it was difficult at first. They were completely undisciplined, poor dears, but with method and consistency, I managed to establish a healthy routine. You'll see during lunch how well-behaved they are now. The women murmured approval, and Roderick had to concentrate intently on the rose he was pruning to avoid showing his anger. Beatrice spoke of his children as if they were decorative projects she had perfected, not children who had lost their mother and were being emotionally abused. The tour continued through the property, with Beatrice highlighting every expensive piece of furniture, every work of art, every imported fabric, always with the same tone of false modesty. It's just a small Matisse, nothing much. These sofas came from Italy, but honestly, sometimes I think we overdid the luxury a bit. When the group returned inside the house, Roderick moved to a position that allowed him to observe through the large dining room windows. The table was magnificently set, with the finest china, sparkling crystals, and elaborate floral arrangements. Everything meticulously planned to impress. It was then that Sophie and Peter were introduced to the guests. They entered the room hand in hand, dressed like miniature adults. Sophie wore a light blue silk dress with matching ballet flats, her hair perfectly styled with a tiara. Peter wore dress trousers, a white shirt, and a small waistcoat that made him look like a miniature gentleman. But what caught Roderick's attention most were their eyes, dull, without the characteristic sparkle of childhood. "These are my most precious jewels," Beatrice introduced, placing her hands on the children's shoulders in a way that seemed affectionate, but which Roderick could see was too firm. "Sophie and Peter, greet the ladies." "Good afternoon, ladies," Sophie said, mechanically performing a small rehearsed curtsy. "Good afternoon," Peter repeated, trying to imitate his sister, but stumbling over the words due to his young age. The women laughed, charmed by the perfectly orchestrated presentation. "How lovely, Beatrice," exclaimed one of them. "So well behaved." "It's incredible how you managed to transform them in such a short time," another commented. "When I met them at that charity event last year, they were so wild." Beatrice smiled, lightly squeezing the children's shoulders. "Consistent discipline works wonders, dear. Sometimes we need to be firm to be truly loving." Lunch was served with all the pomp Beatrice had planned. Refined dishes prepared by the chef, expensive wines, superficial conversations about travel, jewelry, and the latest social gossip. The children remained rigidly seated in their chairs, responding only when directly questioned, always with clearly rehearsed answers. "Sophie, are you enjoying your ballet classes?" asked one of the guests. "Yes, Mum," Sophie replied, her tone monotonous. "Aunt B, Mommy says I need to practice every day to become a disciplined ballerina." "And do you like it, dear?" the woman insisted, seeming genuinely interested. A flicker of hesitation crossed Sophie's face before she cast a quick glance at Beatrice. "I like it very much, ma'am." Roderick, who was discreetly observing while pretending to work in the adjacent garden, noticed the lie. Sophie had always detested ballet. Her interest was in painting classes, something Anne had always encouraged. Lunch proceeded without incident until dessert. Imported Italian ice cream served in crystal goblets, accompanied by red berries and delicate biscuits. The children received smaller portions, and Peter visibly struggled to use the small special spoon without spilling anything. That's when it happened. Distracted by a question asked directly to him, Peter moved abruptly, bumping Sophie's arm. The girl, startled, lost control of the crystal goblet, which tipped over onto the immaculate white tablecloth. The glass didn't break, but the pink ice cream spread like an accusing stain on the imported linen. A deathly silence fell over the table. The guests froze, looking from Sophie to Beatrice, whose face underwent a terrifying transformation. The amiable smile disappeared, replaced by a mask of contained fury. Her eyes, previously warm for her visitors, turned cold as ice. "Sophie," she said, her voice dangerously controlled. "What just happened?" The girl visibly paled, beginning to tremble. It was an accident, Mommy. Peter moved and Are you blaming your little brother for your carelessness?" Beatrice interrupted, her tone sharp as a razor. "No, Sophie began to cry silently, tears streaming down her face without a sound. "Accidents happen, Beatrice," interjected one of the guests, seeming uncomfortable with the situation. "It's just ice cream. The tablecloth can be washed." But Beatrice seemed not to hear. She rose slowly, her eyes fixed on Sophie. "I am very disappointed in you. After everything we discussed about proper table manners," Yara, who was serving coffee at the other end of the table, quickly approached. "I'll clean that right away, Mum. It was just a small accident." "Don't interfere," Beatrice replied without taking her eyes off Sophie. Then, in a movement as quick as it was unexpected, she raised her hand to slap the girl. What happened next left everyone present in shock. Yara moved with surprising agility, placing herself between Beatrice and Sophie. Beatrice's hand struck the maid's face with a smack that echoed through the room. A stunned silence followed. Yara remained firm, her face turned by the force of the slap, a red mark rapidly forming on her cheek. Sophie, protected behind her, watched, with wide eyes of fear and astonishment. The guests seemed paralyzed, some with expressions of shock, others with evident discomfort. "How dare you?" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you interfere in the upbringing of my children?" "They are not your children," Yara replied softly but firmly, straightening her posture. "And no child deserves to be hit for spilling ice cream." The tension in the room was palpable. The guests exchanged nervous glances, clearly witnessing a side of Beatrice that she had never allowed them to see. "You're fired," Beatrice declared, each syllable laden with venom. "Get out of my house immediately." "With pleasure," Yara replied, maintaining her dignity, despite the red mark on her face. She turned to Sophie, who was still trembling, and said gently, "It's all right, dear. It was just an accident." It was at this crucial moment that Roderick made his decision. He could no longer remain merely an observer, not after seeing Yara risk everything to protect his daughter. Glancing quickly at the recorder in his pocket, which had captured the entire scene, he knew it was time to act. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked decisively towards the dining room door. The tension in the dining room was palpable when Roderick entered. All heads turned in his direction, expressions of confusion momentarily replacing the previous shock. Dressed in his gardener's uniform, fake beard, and thick-rimmed glasses, he was still Raymond to everyone present. Everyone except Peter, who looked at him with a surprising intensity for a 3-year-old. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her anger momentarily redirected. "How dare you interrupt my lunch? Get back to the garden immediately." "No," Roderick replied simply, his voice still maintaining the Yorkshire accent he had adopted. He walked calmly to stand beside Yara, who looked at him in astonishment. "No," Beatrice repeated, incredulous. "You're fired too. Both of you, get out of my house right now." Roderick smiled slightly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's going to be a bit complicated considering this is my house." The silence that followed was absolute. Beatrice blinked several times, as if unable to process what she had just heard. The guests exchanged confused glances. It was Sophie who broke the silence. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice trembling with hope and uncertainty. With deliberate movements, Roderick removed his glasses, then the fake beard, finally revealing his face. The murmur of surprise that swept through the room was audible. "Yes, Princess, it's me," he replied, using his normal voice for the first time in days. Peter let out a cry of joy and jumped from his chair, running into his father's arms, who lifted him and hugged him tightly. Sophie hesitated only a second before doing the same, wrapping her thin arms around her father's waist, burying her face in his gardener's shirt. What kind of joke is this, Roderick?" Beatrice finally managed to say, her voice wavering between anger and disbelief. "You said you were on a business trip. And you said you'd take good care of my children," he retorted calmly. "It seems we both lied, didn't we?" The guests now looked extremely uncomfortable, some already gathering their handbags discreetly, preparing for a strategic retreat. But Roderick had no intention of letting them leave yet. "Ladies, I apologize for the unexpected spectacle, but I believe you deserve to see the truth behind the perfect family that was presented to you today." His voice was controlled, but laden with a contained emotion that no one could ignore. Beatrice regained some of her composure, adjusting her dress with nervous gestures. "I don't know what game you're playing, Roderick, but this is completely inappropriate. We will discuss this privately after our guests have left." "There will be no further discussion," he replied, still holding the children. "What's going to happen now is that everyone will hear the truth." Carefully, he took the small recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table. "For over a week, I lived disguised in my own home because I suspected something was terribly wrong. My children, who had always been cheerful and expressive, had become frightened shadows. Staff who had faithfully served our family for years disappeared abruptly. And you, Beatrice, showed two faces so distinct that I could barely believe it." Beatrice visibly paled as Roderick pressed the play button on the recorder. Her voice filled the room, crystal clear and merciless. "Your father is weak and sentimental. He allowed you to become spoiled and disobedient children. I am correcting his mistakes." Another recording followed. "If you tell your father anything when he comes back, I'll know I can't trust you, and people who don't deserve trust don't deserve love. Do you want your father to stop loving you?" And yet another. "That woman is gone and isn't coming back. The faster you accept that, the better for all of us." Each fragment was more incriminating than the last. Veiled threats, emotional manipulations, psychological cruelty disguised as discipline. Beatrice's face shifted from white to red, from shock to fury, as the guests stared at her with expressions ranging from horror to silent condemnation. "Turn that off immediately," Beatrice demanded, standing up abruptly. "That's an invasion of privacy. It's illegal." "What's illegal is the psychological abuse of children," Roderick replied firmly. And there's nothing private about what you did to my children, in my house right under my nose. Yara, who had remained beside Sophie all this time, then spoke. It's all true. I witnessed daily how the lady treated these children when she thought no one important was looking. Beatrice turned to her, her eyes flashing with hatred. You're nothing but a meddling housemaid. No one will believe your word against mine. We don't need her word, Roderick interjected. The recordings speak for themselves, and I have hours of them. Every insult, every threat, every moment of terror you inflicted on my children. This is ridiculous, Beatrice tried again, now addressing the guests. He's distorting everything. Yes, I am strict with the children, but only for their own good. Roderick never got over Anne's death and is projecting his problems onto me. The casual mention of Anne's passing made Roderick clench his fists, but he remained calm. The difference between strictness and cruelty is clear to any sensible person, and we just witnessed how you treat a 6-year-old for a simple accident at the table. One of the guests, the one who had tried to defend Sophie earlier, stood up. Beatrice, I think we should go. This is a family matter. No, Veronica, please stay, Roderick insisted. You were brought here to witness the perfect family Beatrice built. It's only fair that you see the reality behind the facade. He looked at Sophie, still clinging to his waist. Sophie, do you want to say anything? Don't be afraid, Princess. No one will be angry with you for telling the truth. Sophie looked at her father, then at Beatrice, and finally at Yara, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, the girl said in a low but firm voice, Aunt B, she said we had to forget about Mommy Anne, that we couldn't talk about her or draw her or have her pictures. She tore up my drawing yesterday and her voice trailed off. And she took Toby, Peter added, referring to his teddy bear. She said he was for babies and threw him away. One of the guests put a hand to her mouth, clearly horrified. Another murmured something about needing fresh air. Beatrice's social mask visibly crumbled before the audience she so desperately wanted to impress. This is absurd, she exclaimed, her voice rising an octave. They're just confused children. I was just trying to establish my position as their new mother. You would never be their mother, Roderick replied, his voice now laden with cold anger. A mother protects, nurtures, respects. What you did was try to erase the memory of their true mother and replace it with a controlling and cruel version of motherhood. He turned to Yara, whose slap mark was still visible on her cheek. Thank you for protecting my daughter today. For all the small acts of kindness you showed my children when no one else was looking. Yara blushed slightly. I just did what anyone with a heart would do, sir. Beatrice looked from one to the other, understanding dawning on her face. You were in cahoots? Was this all a setup? You and this maid? Roderick shook his head. Yara had no idea who I was until this moment. Her kindness towards my children was genuine and spontaneous, something you, despite all your education and sophistication, seem incapable of understanding. He turned back to the guests. Ladies, I appreciate your understanding, but now I need to attend to my children. Marcia will escort you out. The women rose, almost in unison, murmuring apologies and hurried goodbyes. None looked directly at Beatrice as they left, a silent testament to how her social reputation had been irrevocably damaged. When only Roderick, the children, Yara and Beatrice remained in the room, the silence that followed was charged with expectation. It was Beatrice who broke it, her voice now cold and calculating. You'll regret this, Roderick. I have rights as your wife. Your lawyers will receive copies of these recordings, he interrupted calmly, along with testimonies from the staff you mistreated and fired. Believe me, Beatrice, you don't want to take this to court. She stared at him for a long moment, the calculation visible in her eyes. Finally, with an abrupt movement, she pulled the wedding ring from her finger and threw it onto the table. Keep your spoiled children and your ostentatious house, she said, her voice trembling with rage. This was never about love anyway. It was just convenient. For you, perhaps, Roderick replied. For me, it was a painful lesson about trusting appearances. Beatrice cast a final contemptuous look at everyone before leaving the room, the sound of her heels echoing across the marble of the entrance hall like a final reminder of her presence. When the front door slammed shut, Roderick finally allowed himself to relax, bending down to properly hug his children. Sophie was openly crying now, not tears of fear but of relief. Peter clung to his father's neck as if he would never let go. "Is she coming back, Daddy?" Sophie asked between sobs. "No, Princess, she's never coming back." He kissed the top of his daughter's head. "And you'll never have to be afraid in your own home again." Yara watched the scene with a shy smile as if she were about to withdraw to give the family privacy. Roderick looked up at her. "Please stay," he asked. "You're a part of all this now." She hesitated. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry I didn't report what was happening sooner, but I was afraid no one would believe me, and I needed the job to help my mother, and—" "You did more than I could have expected," he interrupted gently. "You were the only one who had the courage to protect my children when I wasn't there to do it." The weeks that followed were filled with healing and rebuilding. The divorce was quick and discreet, Beatrice preferring a generous but silent settlement to a public confrontation she would certainly lose. The manor underwent another transformation, not of furniture or decor, but of atmosphere. Laughter returned, the children's voices filled the corridors without fear, photos of Anne returned to the walls, and Toby, the teddy bear Beatrice had hidden at the back of a closet, returned to Peter's arms. Mrs. Teresa, the old housekeeper, was located and invited to return, which she accepted with tears of joy. Julia, the beloved nanny, also returned. And Yara received an offer to become the house coordinator, with a salary that would allow her not only to help her family, but also to continue her interrupted pedagogy studies. On a sunny afternoon, as the children played in the garden under Julia's watchful eye, Roderick found Yara organizing books in the library. "Do you know what Sophie told me yesterday?" he commented, helping her place a book on a high shelf. "That you look like a princess when you smile." Yara blushed, a habit Roderick found increasingly charming. "She's a very sweet girl. She's returning to the child she must have been before all this." "Thanks to you in large part," he replied. "Your name, Yara, it's like the indigenous legend, isn't it? The water spirit who protects the rivers." "My mother thought it suited me," she smiled, "though I've never felt particularly magical." "I disagree," Roderick said, his gaze meeting hers. "What you did for my children, risking your job, your safety, was the purest form of magic I know." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, laden with something new and indefinable. It wasn't romance, not yet. Both carried too many scars for anything. So hasty. It was something more fundamental, respect, gratitude, and perhaps the beginning of a friendship that in time could blossom into something deeper. "The roses are beautiful this year," Yara commented, breaking the silence. "Are you taking care of them personally now?" "Yes," Roderick replied, smiling. "I discovered I have a talent for gardening after all. There's something comforting in nurturing something, watching it grow, bloom." "Like children," she completed. "Exactly like children." Outside, Sophie's laughter echoed through the garden, accompanied by Peter's joyful shout. Roderick and Yara turned to the window, watching the children run freely across the lawn, their faces illuminated by a joy that had been absent for too long. "I think we're all blooming now," Yara said softly. Roderick nodded, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Palm Grove Manor, which had briefly been transformed into a prison of fear, was returning to being a home. And at that moment, watching his children play under the London sun, with Yara by his side, he knew they had found their way back to the light. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Roderick, Sophie and Peter's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative about courage, protection and rebirth, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We eagerly await your comments on how you felt accompanying this family on their journey of overcoming adversity.